We do want to turn to politics now, and new signs that the tariffs may be taking a political toll on President Trump amid growing concern at home and around the world about the impact of a global trade war. The president today hosting Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni at the White House after yesterday meeting with Japanese delegations as the White House works to hammer out new trade deals. Speaking to reporters during the meeting, President Trump said that, of course, there will be a deal with the EU before his 90-day period for reduced tariffs is up, but also said there is no rush and that the U.S. is in control.
Everybody wants to make a deal, and if they don't want to make a deal, we'll make the deal for them, because that's what's going to happen. I think I can say for Scott and the other people that are working on it that we're listening and we're going to be very fair to people, but, you know, we're the one that really sets the deal, and that's what we'll be doing.
President Trump raising some eyebrows earlier in the day after he criticized Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell and again called the independent agency to lower interest rates. On social media, the president said that the Fed chair is, quote, always too late and wrong, and added Powell's termination cannot come fast enough. He repeated that criticism in the Oval Office this afternoon, saying that if he wanted Powell out, he would be out, and repeatedly called on him to lower rates. That comes one day after Chairman Powell warned that Trump's tariffs would likely worsen inflation. I asked President Trump late last year if he would try to dismiss the Fed chair. This is what he told me. The chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, said he will not leave his post even if you ask him to. Will you try to replace Jerome Powell?
No, I don't think so. I don't see it. But I think if I told him to, he would. But if I asked him to, he probably wouldn't. But if I told him to, he would.
You don't have plans to do that right now?
No, I don't.
Worries about the economy and frustration over inflation were arguably the biggest factors in Mr. Trump winning the White House. But a new poll out from our friends at CNBC shows a public souring on his economic leadership. 55% now disapprove of President Trump's handling of the economy. That's higher than his overall disapproval number and the highest disapproval number on the economy he's ever gotten in the CNBC All-America Economic Survey. Broken down by party, his handling of the economy is still very high among Republicans, but underwater among Democrats and independents. And Americans are also growing more pessimistic about the economy. Back in October, just 17% of respondents said the economy will get worse. That number is now up to almost 50%. The only two issues in this survey where President Trump is above water are immigration-related. Tariffs and inflation earn him the lowest marks. NBC's Yamiche Alcindor has the very latest from the White House, and in a moment we will be joined by CNBC senior economics reporter Steve Liesman. Yamiche, thank you so much for being here. So let's talk about the pressure that the White House is under, the president is under, to try to get a deal. We have heard Peter Navarro, his top trade advisor, say repeatedly 90 deals in 90 days. Did the president signal he's close to getting a deal today?
Well, the president said he feels like he's in a good place when it comes to making these deals. He's said over and over again that his tariff strategy, chaotic as it may be, inconsistent as it may be, that it is bringing countries to the table. So the White House was saying that there are a number of countries that it's negotiating with, including Japan, the EU, South Korea. The president has also said that he's negotiating specifically with the European Union as a bloc. But it's interesting, of course, that the Italian prime minister, someone that is referred to as a Trump whisperer, someone that the president called fantastic today, that she is here talking to him. You can imagine that they are talking about that deal and that the president is feeling good about where they stand. The Italian prime minister also said that she feels like the U.S. is, quote, reliable as a partner and that she wouldn't be here if she didn't think so. So it's an interesting point of view. That being said, until something is actually inked, I think it's still there's still a lot of questions of what the White House will actually get out of this, ultimately get out of this. So we'll have to see how this works out, Kristen.
And Yamiche, of course, we're reporting on the fact that the president's really ramping up his language towards the Fed chair. You heard him there say, if I ask him to leave, he'll leave. Level set with us. What's the reality check here? Can he just remove the Fed chair?
Well, Kristen, I don't know what you were doing at 6:12 a.m., but I was not on the internet. But the president was posting messages about Fed Chair Jerome Powell saying that his termination couldn't come quickly enough, fast enough for him. So the president is clearly wanting to remove Fed Chair Jerome Powell. But as you said, the question of whether or not he can actually do so is a big one. We know that the Federal Reserve Chair Act, Federal Reserve Act that established the Fed said that the generals there, the governors there, that they call them, the officials there, they serve 14-year terms. And Fed Chair Jerome Powell isn't supposed to be done with his term until May 2026. And the legislation says that people can only be removed for cause, and that policy decisions, the courts have found, are not part of the cause factor there. So, of course, the president has been pushing the sort of issues here. And it wouldn't be surprising if he tried to remove Fed Chair Jerome Powell, even if he ended up having to have a battle in court, Kristen.
Well, we'll have to see how it plays out. Yamiche, thank you so much. Steve Liesman, let me head over to you and get your take. You just heard what Yamiche had to say about the Fed chair. What are the implications of these mounting tensions between the president and the Fed chair?
Well, in the first instance, it creates a certain volatility, a certain undermining of confidence in the outlook for the Federal Reserve and Federal Reserve policy. If it goes further and the Federal Reserve chair is removed, it would have much more serious consequences in terms of undermining trust in the U.S. bond market, the deepest, most liquid, most important one in the world, as well as undermining trust in the U.S. dollar. All of a sudden, Federal Reserve policy would not be seen as an independent policy, but one that is made and behooven and otherwise linked to politics and the political will of the president of the United States.
But it's complicated, right, Steve? I mean, he can't, by law, he can't just remove him.
That is the general understanding of almost every legal expert who's spoken about it. I think your prior guest just said there is this clause that allows him to be removed for cause, which is generally seen as malfeasance, which is not believed to be linked to a disagreement over Federal Reserve monetary policy. By the way, it's worth pointing out the Fed chair does not make policy on his own. There are 11 voting members of the Federal Market Committee, 19 total members of the committee. They make policy. That is their decision by a vote, which is recorded and made public. So you could fire the chair, I suppose. That doesn't guarantee you're going to get the policy you want. But then if you think about what would happen next, which is really the scary part, if you were to fire the chair, appoint somebody in that person's place, all policy emanating from the Federal Reserve would now have a political stench tied to it.
And Steve, before I let you go, give us the top lines from this CNBC polling that's out today that, if you're the White House, shows some potentially worrying data there. Well,
yes, the president's approval rating, his overall approval rating, was fairly consistent with what we've seen. In fact, it was about equal with when he left office in 2020. The big story there was the economic approval rating. As you know, Christian, I've been doing this poll for about 17 years, including during the entire Trump presidency. During no period was the president's economic approval underwater. His views, the approval on the economy has always been the cornerstone strength of his presidency and of his political power in that regard. Now he is underwater when it comes to the economy, and underwater in a deep way. And the importance there is Democrats who, our pollsters, I will tell you, they didn't think Democrats could be any more negative economically on the president. They got more negative. And then independents joined them in being deeply negative. He still has strong support from his base. There doesn't look to be much erosion there on the overall. But what is interesting is that Republican on handling of the economy at 78, it's a few points lower than the overall approval rating, as well as on several key issues. On tariffs and on inflation, the Republican numbers drop, and they're more deeply negative for independents as well. Does it matter? Well, Kristen, that's exactly your department. I don't know the extent to which polling right now matters to this president, either because of it's still long until the congressional races, which, by the way, our preference shows a slight preference for Democrats by just 2 points, pretty much unchanged from the last poll. So it's unclear at this point whether political polls like this matter to this president, who's sort of willing to abide this kind of market turmoil, as well as some of the other issues that are out there.
Well, and Steve, I just talked to a White House official who downplayed the findings, saying, look, it's one poll. Overall, his approval rating still going strong.
Except it's not. It's almost, there are multiple polls now that show this issue on the economy. By the way, I will point out, to be fair, he's strong on immigration, closing the southern border. That's where he has a majority, as well as deportation. He has a smaller, but still a majority there.
Well, Steve, we so appreciate your bringing us these new numbers. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.